Hello and welcome to Toronto Apologetics. My name is Tony Costa, and today I'm going to be continuing in our series on answering questions about Christmas. And so today we are going to be discussing the question about the Yuletide. What does the Yuletide and Yule Log have to do with Christmas? And you may have heard that term before and probably wondering, what does the word Yule, what does that mean? And it must certainly be something that must come from paganism. And so what I want to do is I want to delve into this question. We need to understand that the word Yule appears in some well-known Christmas songs. So here we have the Christmas song, made famous by Nat King Cole, among many other singers. And so the first stanza says, "Chestnuts roasting on an open fire, Jack Frost nipping at your nose, Yuletide carols being sung by a choir, and folks dressed up like Eskimos." And so the reference here to Yuletide, what exactly does that word mean? What is a Yule, and what is a Yuletide? And what's a Yule log? Well, we're going to be talking a bit about that. Now, there have been those who've tried to argue that the idea of the Yule, or the references to the Yuletide or the Yule log, or in Britain, it's also known as the block, the Yule block, is based actually on a medieval Christian writer who suggested that the sources of the Yule may have been pagan. And this is where we look at the person called the Venerable Bede. And this Christian writer, medieval Christian writer, lived from 673 to 735 AD. And it was from Bede that we got this idea that the Yuletide and the Yule log, all of that was an adaptation or an importation from paganism into Christianity. But unfortunately, as many historians have noted, much of what Bede says here about the Yule tide and the Yule period and so forth, many historians and scholars have shown that Bede was actually mistaken. A lot of what he was saying about this was based on hearsay. It was based on a number of speculations that eventually were proven to be false. And so we know, for example, that Bede tried to connect the Yuletide with the winter solstice in Germany. And the winter solstice, of course, is December the 21st, December 22nd. It's the time where you have the sun is, depending on its position during the month of December, you have the shortest day of the month. And then after that, it begins to increase in terms of daylight and so on. And so the idea that the Germans in particular, the Anglo-Saxons and so forth, that they focused on this winter solstice, according to what Bede was saying, is actually not the case. And in fact, we know that December 25th was never called Yule, or it was never referred to as the Yuletide. And so we know that there, in fact, even 300 years after this, in the 900s into the year 1000 and so forth, we also know that December 25th was not known by this term Yule, and at least until the 11th century. So it's really in the 11th century that you begin to see a number of talks about this. Now, how did this word Yule, Y-U-L-E, sometimes pronounced Yule, J-O-L, but the J is pronounced as a Y. Where did this idea come from? Well, it seems that the most likely source for the word Yule being used as a synonym for Christmas seems to have come not from a pagan source, but seems to have come actually from the influence of a Christian king. And this particular king in question was Hakon, the king of Norway. And Hakon ruled from AD 940 to 963. And so it seems that towards this time period, we notice that this idea of Yule actually comes from Scandinavia. It doesn't come from Germany or the Anglo-Saxons. It actually comes from Scandinavia. And Scandinavia is that region of the world that is made up of 3 countries: Norway, Finland, and Sweden. And so Hakon, the king of Norway, had become a Christian. And as a Christian, what he did was he is the one who actually shifted the old Scandinavian festival in February. He shifted the date of the winter holidays, if you will. He shifted it to December 25th, and he did so in declaring an already settled practice that December 25th was already celebrated as the birth of Jesus Christ. We've discussed that. If you're interested in that, you may want to look at my video, Was Jesus Born on December 25th? And what he did was he simply shifted this winter festival in February, and he brought it into December 25th simply because it was the time of the celebration of the birth of Christ. And so the word Yule for this time period in the winter months was moved into December. In England, by the time you get to the 12th century, that is the 1100s, by the time you get to the 12th century, this new term, Yule or Yuletide, is adopted as a reference for Christmas. Now, remember, Bede, as we mentioned earlier, the Venerable Bede, part of the problem was he realized that one of the names that the Germanic peoples were giving to December 25th was the word Modra nicht. And this was a word that literally meant the night of mothers. And he thought that this was indicating some type of a pagan event, but most likely what it was referring to was actually a reference to the mother of Jesus. Being the mother of Jesus, Modra nicht would be the night of the mother. That is to say, that the night in which the mother of Jesus bore the Christ child. And so it came to refer to the feast of the Nativity, that is the feast of the birth of Christ. And so what we do know is that the only time that the word Yule starts being used of Christmas, once again, comes from the Scandinavian influence through this particular king, Hakon, the king of Norway. At any rate, what we need to point out here is that Yule did not relate to Christmas, at least until the time of this particular king. Others would say, well, you know, the Yule log was sacred to Thor, the god of thunder, and they would burn a log in memory of Thor. There doesn't seem to be any evidence of that. We see that, for example, today in our in Christmas time, you will notice you can go to the grocery store or a bakery and you will have this particular cake or dessert, if you will, called the Yule log. And it's made of chocolate. And if you notice, it resembles a log. And you will notice it has the green and the red representing the holly and the ivy. And so people would say, well, there you have it. This is a pagan symbol. The pagans would put these logs in the fire in memory of Thor, the god of thunder, and so forth. And so when Christians today are buying desserts like this and serving them at Christmas time, they're obviously basing this on a pagan practice. And again, the evidence for this is nil. There is no evidence of these logs being offered to Thor in sacrifice and so forth. Well, if that's not the case, well, how did this get into the Christian tradition? How did this come into Christmas time? And what in the world does a a Yule log have to do with the time of the birth of Jesus? And why do Christians even use it in the first place? Well, the Yule log is not pagan. So where does it come from? Well, we need to understand that in Europe, and of course, Western and Eastern Europe, we need to understand that the Yule log, especially during the winter months, and especially during the time you want to celebrate Christmas, the Yule log, of course, the thicker the log, the better, was meant to keep the house warm. It was meant to keep church buildings warm. If you really wanted to have a festival with your friends during the winter, you want to make sure you've got enough wood in the fireplace. And you also want to make sure that the logs you're using are not thin, otherwise they'll burn out, but that these logs are substantial, they're thick, and so forth and so on. Now, we take this for granted. Today, we have furnaces, and we have various devices that keep our houses warm. But in the medieval period, if you didn't have a fireplace, if you didn't have sufficient wood and logs, you would freeze to death. It was a life and death situation. We still have remnants of that today. Many homes still have fireplaces. And even though some of them are gas powered, that is to say, they're connected to the gas lines and so forth, you still find homes today that are log burning fireplaces. And of course, this is simply a remnant of yesteryear. Even when pilgrims came to North America, they had to depend on fireplaces to keep themselves warm, because, as I said, during the winter months, it was definitely a life and death situation. And so we really got to start thinking about this in terms of fireplaces, and keeping the fire going. And especially if you're going to have guests over for a party, you want to make sure you've got sufficient heat to warm up the home. And the whole idea is that in the wintertime, the fireplace is a place of comfort, and it's a place of warmth, and people enjoy looking at the fire and so forth. So it resonates with family gatherings and enjoying this warm period and so forth and so on. And so that's what makes fireplaces very attractive. And so the background to the Yule log has nothing to do with paganism. In fact, we do have a reference here. This is from J.G. Fraser's The Golden Bough, and he makes reference here to the custom of the Yule log among the Germans. And so the reference here, notice this is after King Haakon, King of Norway, from the 10th century. We're now looking here at the 12th century. And Fraser says this, and I quote, "Among the Germans, the custom of the Yule log is known to have been observed in the 11th century. For in the year 1184, the parish priest of Aachen in Munsterland spoke of bringing a tree to kindle the festal fire at the Lord's nativity," close quote. Now, I want you to notice the reference here to 1184. This is now 12th century. And what Fraser tells us here is that a parish priest, there was a record of a parish priest in Germany, in Aachen, in Munsterland, and he spoke of bringing a tree, that is a log, to kindle the festal fire at the Lord's nativity. That's a pretty big log there if you look at the fireplace. Did this priest bring a tree to worship, to offer to Thor? No. The idea here was that if we're going to celebrate the Lord's nativity, which would be Christmas Eve, of course, the most important, one of the most important evenings in the Christian calendar is Christmas Eve. If you're going to celebrate Christmas Eve together, whether in a church or in a home, and you want it to be, these are sometimes overnight celebrations. People would be celebrating Christmas overnight from Christmas Eve into the early mornings of Christmas Day. And so if you're going to go to a church service and you want to sing carols and you want to celebrate the birth of the Lord Jesus Christ and give thanks to God, and you're in the dead of winter, you better make sure you've got a fireplace big enough to warm up the whole church building. And you also better be sure that you've got sufficient wood to keep the fire going. Otherwise, as I said, no fire, you're pretty much in peril. Your life is pretty much in peril. So notice that this tradition in Germany, dated to the 12th century, 1184, notice that the practice was about kindling fire, kindling the festal fire of the Lord's nativity. And so because Yule became associated with the celebration of Christ's birth, it was adopted as a synonym among the Scandinavians and then the Germans. The Yule simply referred to the celebration of Christmas. And so we need to understand then that in Europe, the practice of bringing in the Yule log, bringing in the largest, the biggest tree log that you can find, to bring it into the house, to put it into the hearth, and to burn it so that people can have a lovely Christmas Eve service and have Christmas Eve dinner together and so forth. And of course, Christmas Day as well. We're told here by Ronald Hutton, who specializes in the calendar and the history of the ritual year in Britain. He tells us this, and I quote, "The most obvious function of the custom, that is the Yule log, was simply festive. That a big piece of wood was needed to keep the fire burning through the unusually protracted feasting and merrymaking of Christmastide, and that households competed against each other to get the biggest, a form of jovial contention, certainly well documented in peasant societies," close quote. And so this would be a time of competition. People would say, I can get the largest tree log. My tree log is much better than yours. And so this would be a time of joy. This would be a time of fun. This would be a time of contention among the peasants. And this was really a time of joy and fun for families that lived in peasant societies. And so I hope you can now understand why the whole issue of Yule and Yuletide and Yule log, a lot of these things on the face of it tend to look, as many people say, it looks pagan and so forth and so on. But when we dig deeper and we look at the history and where this word came from and what did it mean to these ancient people, and what was the purpose of burning the Yule log? Was it to sacrifice to Thor? Or was it actually to celebrate Christmas, to heat up the home, the church buildings with the fireplace and so forth and so on? And of course, by this introduction of the Yuletide celebrations into England, of course, this caused this practice to move out into North America, into the British Commonwealth and so forth. And that's why today you will notice in many Western countries, they still celebrate the Yuletide. And so folks, we hope you enjoyed this video. Hope that this was edifying to you, instructive, educational. I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel. There will be many more videos coming down the road on various topics like this and others related to the defense of the Christian faith. So please subscribe to the channel, like, pass it along, let other people know. I'm also teaching a new online course in January, beginning January the 23rd, 2022. And it'll go for 8 Sunday evenings, 8 consecutive Sunday evenings till March 13th, 2022. And it's an online course on logic. And this is a course that is open to anyone around the world that is interested in learning, expanding your knowledge. And you don't have to have any background, seminary training, or really any prerequisites for the course. And these lectures that I conduct are also recorded. And so those students who may not be able to catch up, or students who live in different time zones, are able to watch the videos and review them and so forth. So all that information, if you're interested in this new course, is going to be placed in the description box of this video. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you for giving up your time just to watch this video and to learn. And so look forward to seeing you again in a future video. Take care and God bless. Bye for now.